time to shift gears. This is the Man Shift Guide.
Welcome back to another episode. As you can see, we've done a little bit of changing things up. I got like a new mic, I got some stuff and some lights going on here. So as we say, we get a little bit better every episode, 1% better. And this week I have Daniel with us, who experienced a traumatic brain injury at a younger age. Saying we got this happened when going into the senior year of high school. And then I would like to cover that a little bit and then kind of how it affected your life. And it's kind of pretty much like, I don't want to say it changed the course, but kind of led the course of the decisions that you've made into the career that you're doing now, which is all super awesome. So
Yeah.
I think we're gonna start off with that. Like let's talk about like getting into the injury. So you said that it was the summer of going into senior year. So what was that like for you? Like
Mhm.
what was like prior to getting this injury?
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me too. But, pretty typical life before that,
Sure.
right? Um, from small town in Wisconsin and farming, outdoor stuff, just a very typical life of a Midwest kid. And then July 7th, 2009. In a one car rollover. And yeah, from there, yeah, I was knocked out, so I didn't really know like what was going on or anything like that. And then they did brain surgery to stop a brain bleed, but had a stroke in my left prefrontal lobe, and then some of my brain bleed was on the left temporal lobe, and then fractured my skull, collapsed lung. So they kind of are like with my parents, they're like, we don't know what's going to happen, but the next 24, 48 hours will say a lot in terms of how he recovers or if he makes it through the night even, right? So, but that whole trajectory was 10 days ICU, 7 days inpatient rehab, and then 3 months of PT or physical therapy, and then 17 months of speech therapy. So, yeah, I was still doing speech therapy when I went to undergrad for college. It was really, really like bizarre how like your life stops in a certain domain or a certain area, but then everything else kind of continues and you have to balance it.
Honestly, that sounds like almost a quicker recovery than I was expecting. Like speech therapy was a long time, but like,
Mhm.
just being in the ICU for 10 days and then you being in, that sounds like a pretty fast turnover.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was, insurance just didn't want to pay anymore for inpatient rehab.
Sure.
Otherwise, they would have cut me, I think.
Yeah.
But, there's those finicky pieces, right? But
Right.
I mean, going for speech and physical therapy 3 times a week for outpatient, right?
Yeah.
That was quite a bit.
Yeah.
And especially too, because so July was the accident. Then the doctors in the ICU were like, we're probably not going to graduate with your graduating or with the class you started with, your cohort you started high school with. And I don't know where it came from, but I was like, no, I'm going to. And and I did bare minimum credits, but I made it. But the TBI fatigue is, at least for me, was so prominent for the first. He's like that first year I was taking 2, 3 hour naps a day almost, and then sleeping probably 12, 14 hours a night.
Sure.
And then after about 2.5 years, it really started to subside.
So, and to kind of get into, okay, you said kind of like, big words. You talked about like the frontal lobe and then
Yeah,
all
yeah.
those kinds of
Yeah.
things. So, like,
Yep, yep.
knowing a little bit about that stuff, frontal lobe kind of dealing a lot with like the hormones and emotions and things of that nature. And then you
Mhm.
have like, you know, all kinds of other different parts going on there. I'm not like, I don't know too much about it. I know a little bit about like the brain chemistry, but like that frontal part, like that's a serious, like big
Yeah.
injury to have. So
Yeah. Especially being so young.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that prefrontal cortex is a lot of your rationalization, judgment, impulse control,
right,
future goal-oriented thinking. Then the
right.
temporal lobe is your speech or how your body interprets speech, like hearing somebody talk. So they were like, we're not sure if he's going to need to learn or relearn how to talk again, how to read, how to write. And talking itself wasn't so bad. I mean, the first couple months was because I had the respirator in and like just being down here, it was like I could talk looking straight, but if I turned my head, it would get really raspy. Um, but my speech more so centered on like being able to switch from task to task and like then go back to task A and pick up where I left off with task A,
Sure.
or like picking out different words of or different types of words that sound the same but they're different, right? Like theirs, here's, like you can hear, or it's over there, here, right? And like being able to ascertain those pieces is where my speech really focused on because I struggled with that quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then
Mm.
you said you kind of squeaked by that senior year, so
Yeah,
you were able to do that. So how was that for you? Like trying
that
to
was that was wild
yeah,
going to school, and like I remember senior year, but I don't remember senior year.
sure,
Um, I remember I graduated. That was cool. But like in terms of like what classes did I take? No. Like I can remember like freshman year classes, but I can barely remember my senior year classes.
sure,
And our school at the time had the block system, so we only had four classes a day, but they were
okay,
hour and 28 minutes or something a piece. So with how it worked out with my credits was the first semester, I would just go half days. So I only had two classes a day, and then I would go
but
home and just crash because I was
yeah,
so tired. And then second semester, I could actually make it a day, and then I did a half day, and then I would just crash.
yeah,
So that with the brain fatigue after a TBI, like you need to listen to it, but you also need to kind of challenge it a little bit so that it doesn't keep you trapped.
sure,
Because I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now, taking 2 or 3 hour naps during the day.
right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I would assume that they also would probably have like more modified classes, maybe, because like you're not going to be in the regular gen ed at that point, right? Like they're probably gonna,
Still
you know,
was.
were you?
Yeah. Still was gen ed. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, I didn't take all the extra electives that, like somebody that didn't have a TBI
sure,
would have gotten. Like, I think everyone graduates with like X amount of credits or whatever it is. And I graduated with like 4 or 6 credits less, but it was still like the minimum.
sure.
But it wasn't because I failed a class. It was just because I didn't take that many classes because I physically didn't have the capacity to do it.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
you graduated, and you talked about taking your undergrad, and you're still doing your speech therapy till that. Was undergrad shortly after, or were you taking a break
Yeah. No,
shortly
right.
after? You were
Yeah.
just
So
right into it.
senior year and then summer and then the um the university I did go to, I commuted to the first year. I didn't stay on campus or anything like that just because I felt like that would be too much distraction, too much uncertainty.
Sure.
So I would still come home and be able to have a routine, familiar environment, etc. And I think that really helped because then the next year I went up to and I stayed at the University of Green Bay, Wisconsin on campus.
Oh, right on.
So
And how was that for you being on campus?
yeah, I mean, much different, right? But also like, okay, I can do it, right? I
Mhm.
can, and even with undergrad, like I would say I think students take like 15 credits a semester. Then they can graduate in 4 years. I was only taking 12, 13. So I did
Sure.
an extra semester for undergrad, which is fine. I needed to space it out because of just things going on with life and the TBI recovery. I needed to ease into it.
Right.
Uh, but then once I hit my master's, I was fine.
Awesome.
Um,
Yeah, so
so
we talk about like so we're kind of like sure you took your credits and stuff and you talk about like
yeah.
recovery. Like how was that with like the other things you needed to do like while on top of having those kind of classes? Like what did recovery look like? You talk about like speech therapy and
Mm.
stuff, but how did it physically like what physical things did you need to do to like recover from something like that?
Yeah, so one of the things physical therapy did very early on, so I was inpatient, but they might have even tried it in ICU. I can't remember. I don't think so. Maybe just like the first couple of days of inpatient. But so when they cut, because they had to do brain surgery, so they cut right here. And when they make that cut, everything on the left side of your face just pulls over to the right because your right side muscles are all intact up here to like hold your cheeks in place, hold your nose, not your nose, but like the skin around your nose, the muscles around your nose, everything. So when they cut this, it was like cutting a rubber band, everything just right? So they had to go and they would electrically shock certain areas of my face to like re-stimulate the neurons that are firing so they can start healing quicker.
Yeah.
And I remember sometimes in the inpatient, like they would zap me with they would call it a B because it was yellow and it had like four AA batteries in it, and they would get like the sponge wet on the tip. And I would just like they would shock me and I would blink and I wouldn't even try to blink. It would just like do it for me.
Yeah.
Um, so like that stuff, but I mean, really, like I was pretty active physically. You could bale hay for 12 hours a day. Like it was, before the accident, even after I was more recovered. Um, but even just like throwing a basketball and like playing catch with somebody, like just tossing a basketball back and forth. Like I was so exhausted after that.
Yeah. So it's more
Or
fine motor skills.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Or even like be like losing your independence to go to the bathroom or to take a shower, right? And
Sure.
having to have a nurse there to make sure you don't fall. And you're like, what is this? Like, why
Yeah.
do I need this? And then it's like, oh, that's why I need it because I almost just fell over, right? But it's like that balance of like I want to be autonomous or independent, but on one level I can't. So, and to be a young adult and to wrestle with that, that was, yeah, I mean, that was something to address and to
Yeah.
be with and to not avoid because there's a lot of dynamics come into play when you need to depend on other people but don't want to.
Hmm.
Right? You're
Especially when
stubborn.
you're, yeah, especially when you're also getting into like that college life and you really like, I'm an adult now. I want to be on my own, but yet you still have those things that you're kind of recovering from. Like that must have been like a really like, no wonder like you're sleeping and stuff, not also emotionally, you're
Yeah,
also struggling,
yeah,
physically, emotionally, mentally,
yeah,
everything was just, that
yeah.
was really crazy.
Yeah, I think in the ICU, because I mean, again, I was in a coma, in a coma for 3 days, and then in there for another seven. But that was all like tube feeding, right?
Hmm.
So I think in that 10 days, I lost 20 pounds,
Wow.
just gone,
Yeah.
you know. Um, yeah, so it's really interesting what the body can go through in terms of resilience, in terms of healing. And also, too, then you need to give it the time and space to heal, right?
For
Like you
sure.
can't really, even though I wanted to rush the process, and I work with a lot of people that want to rush the recovery process,
Yeah.
even just in more general trauma therapy, not related to TBIs, right? Um, you want to rush it because you want to heal, and some level most of the levels you can't rush it. Like
Yeah.
it's the process that's laying the foundation for healing.
Yeah. And you kind of alluded to like my next question is kind of like, okay, so what are we doing with this master's degree? And you kind of
Yeah.
talk about other people. So you said you've gotten into social work and
Yes.
you were also doing some trauma related type things
Hmm.
associated with that. And do you
Yeah.
think that because of your experience that's kind of why you're doing what you're doing now because of all of that.
Yeah, I definitely think so. There was this time in the inpatient where I don't know where it came from, but I was like, I'm probably gonna land up somewhere in these professions that are around me, right? So like PT, OT, nurse, ruled out doctor because I'm not smart enough.
Hmm.
Like all these different things of what I could do. And actually, then I had a conversation with my sister, who's a social worker, and she was like, check out this profession, right? And that's where I went to, that's how I got into it in undergrad. I did some really powerful volunteer opportunities too before and, or no, it was, well, yeah, before I even started. It was before I started my Bachelor of Social Work stuff, and I was just doing gen eds at the university for that first year. But those things just kind of all came together and solidified like, hey, do the social work piece. And then like a year out from social work undergrad, I figured like a lot of the jobs I really wanted, like to work in hospitals or like psych centers or even private practice, it's like you need to have your own or you need to have a master's degree.
Sure.
And then that's where the master's kind of just came into play and you know, we
Yeah.
rolled with it.
So my wife has her master's in counseling,
Mhm.
and I know that depending on where you are and where you work, kind of counseling and social work are kind of synonymously the same, right? But they're two different things.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's interesting.
so defined what is social work and then kind of like what it is that you do with that title of being a social worker.
Oh, what is a social worker? That's rough. And there are so many segments to social work. You can be in child protection services, adult protection, psych, grant writing,
Okay,
you know, all these different sectors, mental health, private practice. Um, so I would just say like, I mean, you can even go dark side of social work and work for like insurance companies, like auditing, right? And
interesting.
like to say like, do they need therapy or not? So not gonna go there, but I will say most of the time social work is like looking at the betterment of people's lives
Sure.
in some capacity, way, shape, or form, right?
Okay. So
Be it like, go
I
ahead.
was always under the impression that it was more of like looking at being able to connect people with different services that are like in town or whatever, and being able to be kind of like that mediator of like, okay,
Mhm.
this is what you can do, this is where you could go, kind of thing.
Yep.
Um, that's how I've always kind of thought social work was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's like systems perspective, right? Like what do people need? Where can people go, right? A lot of case management can come into that, or clinical case management, or case managers. So definitely a part of it. I went more of the inpatient psych route, lock settings, um, and then started a private practice on the side where, I do a lot of men's work, a lot
cool.
of trauma related to men or how they've lived their lives with it and want to start healing, even if it's been decades. And
Sure.
then also trauma related to TBIs
Okay.
and in major injuries. So,
So let's go more into like that private practice thing then.
mhm.
So like you talk about people who, years down the road who are now kind of wanting to like recover, things of that nature. Like how does someone find you in those cases? Like how
Mm.
like where like do they just kind of like are interested in it so they just like look people up and there you are, or like how do they get,
Yeah.
you know?
That's a good question. I have some blogs on or blog sections in some of my other blogs that actually talk about that because sometimes I have men that reach out and they're like, "Hey, I need therapy." Sometimes I have their partners reach out and be like, "Hey, I think my husband needs therapy."
Okay.
Um, Sometimes it's also people from like a hospital agency saying like, "Hey, I have a 22-year-old who just had a traumatic brain injury. Would you be able to work with them?" Um, so really they can find me in many different ways, right?
Okay.
And one of the things I talk a lot about in my blogs too is like how to know when that you might need therapy, especially as a man in this society, because like we still want to be portrayed as strong, tough, like we got it all together.
Yeah.
Um, the norms of what it's like to ask for help or to be seen asking for help can be quite challenging for some men. And some of the subpopulations I work with too, sub meaning like just different populations, but not like below. But I do a lot of EMS, first responder, military. So like in those professions themselves, like they need to portray themselves as, strong, fit for duty, right? So also making sure, if is it going to challenge their ability to even maintain their job, right? If somebody found out they were in therapy. So there's a lot of nuanced dynamics that can come into it, but it can be so rewarding to have somebody be like, "Hey, I read this on your blog," or like I listened to your podcast to say, "Yeah, I'm noticing these behavioral patterns just keep repeating in my life and they're detrimental."
Yeah.
And how where they come from. Or, you know, I struggle with going 0 to 100 and I don't want to do that with my kids anymore.
Sure.
Right. And some of those things can just be like, okay, I'm way overstressed in life. And some of that could also be tied to like early childhood trauma, or whatever it might be, betrayal trauma that happened earlier in a relationship.
And you talk about like, I think it's getting better. So like you talk about the stigma of men and like trying
Mhm.
to reach out and stuff. I feel like it's getting better. I think that as like the generations are going and kind of looking at the previous and how they are, like I don't want to be that way. Like so I think people are being a little bit more open to it, but like you kind of talk about like the EMS and stuff like that. Um Hopefully that they are, me personally, if I have someone coming to get me, I hope that they're okay. And
Mhm.
therapy would be good for that. And like even like teachers and stuff too. Like I think there's no shame in saying, "Hey, I want to go talk to somebody about
Yeah.
something." And I think a lot of it is just becoming a little bit more self-aware.
Mhm.
And because like there's things that I can say in my because I've done therapy and stuff like that, and kind of like having to peel back the onion and stuff, you know, and kind of like I think most men are just kind of like, this is just who I am, you know? But to
Mhm.
really kind of like pull back the why of who I am,
Yeah.
because you kind of talk about, the traumatic and like the trauma responses for relationships. No, that's like a whole nother topic, but like,
Right.
you know,
Right. Right.
but I think just for whoever's listening, like, there's no shame in talking to somebody, even if it's one or two times, like if you do it and you feel like it's not for you, that's fine. But just like,
Right.
just to be open up for those kinds of things would be um, beneficial to all of us, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think like even picking up on that is like how do people find me, right? And it's like
Yep.
either the guy is like I'm stuck or my life is feels paralyzing, right? Nothing's moving forward, spinning my wheels, same thing, same patterns are kind of replaying over and over throughout the months or the years or whatever it might be. And I can't break those cycles. Sometimes it's their partner, their spouse reaching out. Um, so sometimes it's also just medical professionals reaching out too in terms of like TBIs, right? But in terms of the societal norms that really play into it, I mean, especially for like first responders, police officers, and just the culture of not showing weakness or other people maybe finding out that you're in therapy can also play a huge part in people not seeking therapy. Um, and so so we try to start to change that, and it is changing in our culture, although slowly, but more so of let's flip that and say like what kind of courage does it take to actually not only ask for help but to face some of those pieces or parts of you that maybe you haven't faced or you continuously avoid. that may perpetuate some of those cycles. So the courage, the grit, right, that the perseverance that's needed to do that takes a tremendous amount of strength, tremendous amount of strength. So we try to flip that a little bit.
And I guess to kind of like in closing, as you were speaking, and I was kind of thinking of like, in your opinion, what do you think is the reason why people have such a hard time, men specifically, in like reaching out? Because you talk about like, that like trying to be hard and stuff, and I guess you mentioned something about having a stigma, but I just like I guess my question would be, and there might not be like an answer for like why is there a stigma for that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean there's the pull it up by your bootstraps mentality, right? Of just kind of take care of it yourself. Unless unless it's like a broken bone and your bone is sticking out your skin, right? Then it's okay to ask for help. But so the medical piece is different than maybe the mental health piece in terms of we were or past generations were taught of just kind of pushing through, right? Pushing through. And now things are shifting in our society, right? To more of, hey, it's all right to ask for support, to maybe experience some healing so you don't have to white knuckle or suppress all these emotions that are just kind of building inside of you or trying to come out, but they're just continuously being hardened in. So I think there is shifts. I think, not just there's many factors that come into it, right? Technology, neuroscience, all these different pieces that weren't there 40, 50, 60 years ago. But there are still 40, 50, 60-year-old people out there too that were raised with that mentality.
Yeah, we're kind of like, and I guess I don't know if it's unique to us, but we're kind of like in this era when, people are living longer. So there's a lot
Hmm.
more generations happening at play here. So there are really, I mean, you do have like, you have, like you said, the 60, 70-year-olds. So like the boomers, right? And then you have like the Gen X people. And then you have me, who I'm a millennial. And then you kind of have like, the next group 20-year-old somethings that are kind of like trying to figure things out. And then, my daughter, who's an alpha, who's only
Hmm.
8 years old now. So that's like four generations that are
Yeah.
kind of milling
Right.
around right now. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it'll be interesting to kind of see how that plays out and hopefully be around long enough to see,
Yeah.
how that shifts. So
Yeah. I mean, the hot button topic too, politics plays a lot, right?
sure.
Accessibility or lack of accessibility, coverage of mental health. So there's many different pieces and you know, we will see where the pendulum swings.
Yeah. Yeah. And to wrap things up, usually my last question of the day is someone that you admire, a man that you admire. So I kind of gave you a
Mhm.
little bit of time to kind of think about that on the back burner, and
Yeah.
you have a few minutes to shout that person out.
Yeah. So I'm gonna choose one of my uncles. Um, and more so the story is way before I was even born, right? But experienced just a lot of addiction issues and after decades of addiction was able to turn it into becoming a doctor and maintaining sobriety and recovery for years, but then also too would still volunteer heavy with like wings for addiction recovery centers, right? Um, and so the grit, the perseverance, and also the openness, the gentleness, because there is like you need that grit, you need that perseverance, but there's also those moments where we're human and we need to be gentle and our self-talk or our self-compassion need to be there. And I think he really embodied that gentleness of and granted, it probably took years to develop, right? But but I would choose him for that question. I have another uncle in mind that I would choose too, but it's a toss up. So
Sure.
um,
Yeah. Sounds like
yeah,
a
so
wonderful guy.
yeah. So I would say, really to his credit, to the recovery process, the becoming a doctor, right? Served in the military, and then, he passed away, unfortunately, but they named part of the wing for the addiction recovery center after him.
Awesome. That's way
So
cool.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, thank you for this time and the extended time. We started
Yeah.
recording on a Sunday. It's now a Tuesday, and sometimes it just plays out that way. So I thank you
Yeah.
again for being in, and we'll be sure to put your all of your contact information in the description for you. And
Thank you.
um, yeah, this has been the Man Shift Guide, and we'll see you on the next one.